to another digital discussion, a series of specially curated discussions with industry experts, thought leaders, and curious thinkers to explore new ways of working, insights and knowledge on specific aspects of the industry. Caroline Bayley is a presenter in business, BBC Radio 4. She can be heard on her fantastic programme, The World of Business, talking about a range of topics from around the globe. Recently, however, Caroline has been researching working from home and the impact this is having on us. So we felt it would be a great match to sit down and have a chat together. Caroline, thank you very much for joining us and welcome.
Thank you, it's a pleasure.
I think to kick things off, it'd be great to get a little context on what you've been working on recently and specifically the working from home piece. Could you give us a potted history of that?
Yes, I mean, I work in business on BBC Radio 4, a business documentary series, which is also podcast as the BBC World of Business. And ever since lockdown, I've been working from home. I haven't been into the office or a studio at all. And I worked on 3 documentaries in that time because we've actually been trying to keep churning the programmes out. And it's been quite a learning experience. The first programme was about supply chains, and it was a programme I produced rather than presented. But again, we did all the interviews from home. At that point, we were recording via the studio and getting people to record on their iPhones. We were doing Skype recordings and we were dialing into the studio. By the time I did the working from home programme, we did the whole thing from home, and I worked with a producer who was in her flat the other side of London. I was in my home, and we linked up with every interviewee over Zencaster at that point. I've since moved on to Clean Feed, and we're getting to use all these different tools of the trade. And again, what we were doing was getting interviewees to record themselves on their smartphones as they were talking, even though we were recording a sort of computer recording. But we needed both as backups, and also the internet drops in and out and the quality is not always brilliant. But it's been a case of learning as we go. And even our studio engineer was working from home. So we were having to send all the finished material over to him, and he was mixing at home. I'd recorded my script literally under the duvet, which is another trick for trying to drown out all the echoey sound and try to make it sound a little more like a studio. So I guess what we've proved is that our job can be done from home. I wouldn't say I'd want to do it permanently from home, but it was quite good to be making a program about working from home early on and actually doing it. I mean, we had to do it, we had no choice, but also it was the best way to explore that particular topic.
Yeah, the hiding under the duvet is a trope that comes up quite a lot, specifically for freelancers, but great to hear it has a functional use as well.
Yeah, it seems to work very well, actually, particularly with the working from home program in the studio. They thought it all sounded rather good. So, sometimes it works well. Not always, though. I found when I've had to do retakes, it's really hard to get the sound as it was. It's much, much harder. You can match up much, much more easily in a studio.
And were there any protocol in place for working remotely prior to this, or did you guys have to innovate to find solutions?
We really had to innovate. I mean, protocols have come out really since then, and we have been given a lot of advice, but we had and still do have daily meetings on Zoom. And for the first week or two, they were just dominated by how do you record this from home? How do you do this? And some people are much more sort of tech savvy than others. I wouldn't put myself in the very tech savvy category, but there are people who are in our department, and we were just sharing information and experimenting with different ways of doing it. And I think everyone has got into their own sort of groove now and found their best way of doing it. But I mean, it was difficult. We didn't all have work laptops to start with, and we were using our own computers. We actually needed the whole BBC system, which we didn't have to start with. Those sort of things have been ironed out now. But I mean, I think we were experiencing many of the problems that huge swathes of the population were grappling with as well.
Yeah, let's talk about that. It seems like we've had to adapt, and no matter what you do, whether it's adapting your business entirely or adapting to your current business under the current situation, how have you found it personally, and what do you think will be the long-term ramifications of this?
Personally, I think I've been quite lucky because although I have children, they're university age, so they're around, but I'm not trying to look after them or homeschool them at the same time as doing my job. So I do count myself as very lucky. Um, Through making this program, we talked and heard from many people who do have children and were really struggling trying to do both. And I think for them, it's been incredibly difficult. One person we spoke to said she and her partner were doing a sort of tag team. One would work in the morning while the other looked after the children. They'd swap over in the afternoon, and then they both worked late into the night. And how really tiring and difficult it was, and also how difficult it was to then do a Zoom meeting with her work team and find that they were all rather bored because they were younger and didn't have children, and also their work day didn't really fit in with hers. So I think you've got that extreme, and then you've got the people who feel very isolated, people living on their own, who feel very cut off from work, and for whom this is a completely new experience. And again, in the program, we talked to the Institute for Employment Studies, and they did a survey in the first 2 weeks of lockdown of 500 home workers. And not surprisingly, they found that it was having a toll on people's mental health, but they did find that it was the younger workers who were finding it difficult, the ones who, we're so used to being in the office. So I think it's been a huge time of adjustment for people. And I think the most difficult thing is that although home working has been with us for some time, it hasn't been that widespread. Around 15% of people were doing it before the coronavirus pandemic took hold. But most people would have been having some contact with the office. Most would be maybe working for 2 or 3 days a week at home and going into the office for 1 or 2 days. And I think the difference now is just not going in at all. I've now made 3 programs with producers who I haven't set eyes on. I haven't seen anyone from work since March the 23rd. And it is incredible, really, isn't it? Even if you work from home permanently as a freelancer, you would expect to go into the office of whoever you were doing some work for at that time, maybe for a meeting, but we're just not setting physical eyes on anyone at the moment.
Yeah, that connection, that physical connection is really becoming a palpable feeling for a lot of us. We obviously represent a lot of freelancers, and we talk to a lot of freelancers. We ourselves at the company exclusively operate with a agile workforce. So for the past 3 years, we've only ever communicated online unless we occasionally meet, as you've touched on. The idea of freelancing, I want to touch on this for a bit. It's something that I think a lot of people have a misconception about. The idea of waking up when you want and dragging a laptop into bed before you get your first mochaccino. Do you feel that this experience is going to give people a slightly different insight into what remote working, freelancing, or even an entrepreneurial pursuit might look like?
Well, I think it will, because so many people have simply had to do it. I think it works both ways. I think it will show people how difficult it is on the one hand, but it will also show those employers who have always said that a particular job couldn't be done remotely, that actually in these sort of circumstances, you have to make it work somehow or other. And that blanket refusal to allow somebody to work remotely will change. And we actually saw that with Twitter last week. Jack Dorsey saying, the chief executive of Twitter, saying that his staff could carry on working from home forever if they wanted to. And Facebook and Google saying their staff could carry on at home until at least the end of the year. But interestingly, what Twitter was saying is you can stay at home, but you can come back to the office if you want to. I think it's that element of choice that make such a difference. And obviously freelancers have often made that choice, that they want to work remotely and, you know, have some face-to-face contact. But I think what the current situation has shown us is that, yes, it can be done, but maybe choice is going to be even more important when we go back to some sort of normality, that it doesn't work for everybody. But I can imagine with the social distancing that's going to be necessary in offices, that a certain proportion of the week is going to be spent at home for many people for months. I mean, maybe years, but certainly months to come.
Yeah, and I think we're experiencing the extreme end of remote working and working from home. You've touched on it already. If you've got kids or a partner or a full house, it's a very different dynamic to the typical day to day in, dare I say, normal times. But um, as we move away and as hopefully schools start to reopen and kids start to get out from under the feet, um, how do you feel that people will start to react when some sense of normality kicks in a remote context?
In a remote context, I mean, do you mean whether people will actually want to get back into the office when a bit of normality returns, or whether they're going to think they'd prefer to stay at home?
Yeah, now that they've tasted the extremes of working from home, when they start to level out a little bit and the kids go back to school and things calm down, do you feel that they'll be able to benefit from working from home and see the brighter side of that?
I think they will, because I think everything has become more difficult. Commuting has become more difficult. I mean, particularly in London, I mean, we're being told we've got to walk or cycle, and going by car is going to be difficult because of the congestion charge going up. I mean, it's just going to be more difficult for people to go into work. So I think people, my guess is that people will try to come to some sort of shared working pattern whereby they do some of the week at home and some of the week in the office. But I think that if you spend the whole of your working life out of an office situation, if being a freelancer is different, but if you're attached to a particular organization or company, and if you're never actually locking eyes on your team, I think that could have difficulties long term as people begin to feel more and more remote. You can only have so many Zoom calls, and I'm just not sure that team leaders and managers can know exactly what people are doing without any sort of physical group meetings at some point. But I do think it will change the way working from home is perceived, because it's been shown to be possible, and in some cases it's been shown to work well. But I think there is a downside, and one thing that came out of the program that I made was some research was conducted by Professor Nicholas Bloom, economics professor at Stanford University in the US. He looked at home working 6 years ago now, was a huge advocate of it. He did academic research, he did a TED talk, but his research was based on a large Chinese travel agent called C-Trip. They approached C-Trip, and they had a department of 500 people who all said they were willing to take part in a working from home experiment. They were all people who were willing to do it, and they randomly chose half of them to actually work from home for 9 months, and the other half stayed in the office. This was in Shanghai. The company were in favor of giving it a go because rents are high there, and they just thought they would go along with it, see what happened. And they were astonished by the results. Productivity of the home workers went up by 13% compared to those in the office. They were, they weren't distracted. If the children were ill, they were at home already. They took fewer days off. They were astonished to see how much more productive people were. But interestingly, when they got to the end of the 9 months, almost 2/3 of the people who had actually stayed at home were keen to go back into the office, because they said, yes, okay, we were productive, but some of them felt lonely and isolated and even depressed. But it was rolled out to the whole company, and it was given as a choice. So other people were able to work from home. And there was another fundamental difference, which Professor Bloom pointed out and said made such a difference. And that was that they were working from home for 4 days a week, and they spent 1 day a week in the office. And he said, you know, he was won over by this, but he described his working life under lockdown in California with 4 children at home, 2 of whom were learning the bagpipes. And he said it was a disaster, really. He said his productivity rate had gone right down. He was getting 4 to 5 hours work done a day at most. And he says it's completely different when it's enforced and when you haven't got that element of face-to-face contact.
Yeah, and this seems to be at the core of why either a hybrid solution will be put into place or a craving to get into the office. That connection that we have, and I guess a lot of the time the empathy that we create with others when we sit eye to eye. Something we do a lot of work on here is the concept of meeting online or connecting online and meeting offline. And the idea of being able to collaborate is such an essential aspect of what a lot of our members do and a lot of freelancers require in general. What are your thoughts on the idea of a new version or a new way of working whereby we can fill this lack of touch within an office with local communities or meeting up with peers or people that you may be able to work with in communal spaces? I mean, co-working spaces have boomed, albeit they're now going to be challenged over the next few months. Do you think there's a hybrid version of what we're talking about moving forward?
I mean, I think there is, because we have had to do that, haven't we? I mean, so many meetings have had to be done, you know, on these different platforms. You know, I've done all my interviews sort of over my laptop. I haven't been face to face with an interviewee, as I say, for weeks. But yeah, I really think that there is. I mean, I think what's interesting is looking at what's happened in Silicon Valley, because the youngish tech companies didn't encourage their employees to work from home up until this point. You know, they created these swanky campuses full of perks, making it as attractive as they could to get the best talent and to want them to work there and to want them to be in the office, you know, for quite a long time. And obviously they've got to the point where they've got all their workers at home at the moment, and you have got some of them saying, actually, if you want to work from home, that's fine, because they're realizing that some of them have actually really rather enjoyed that. And that now almost has to be offered as a perk. But the argument before, and it's one that came out in the program that I worked on, was that you needed to have people in the office to be round a table to do the sort of agile management of very focused teams working in a very intense way on software upgrades or new products, and they're together in a room. And that was something advocated by Silicon Valley. And interestingly, IBM had 40% of its workforce working from home up until 2017. I mean, back in, yes, I think it was 2009, they said that 40% of their workforce were home workers. Then suddenly in 2017, they said, actually, we're bringing a whole bunch of people back into the office because we want to practice this agile management. We want these teams, and we don't think it's going to work remotely. But, you know, are we going to see that bounce back again? As you say, I think there's got to be a hybrid now, hasn't there? Because you can't bring everyone back at the same time. And with social distancing, certainly for the next few months, you're not going to be able to have people sitting, you know, at close quarters round a table or round a whiteboard. So I think, as you say, these virtual communities have got to find a way of creating that room, creating that intensity without physically being together.
It's something that for the past few years we've been exploring and in many ways experimenting, particularly with the concept of creating a company culture and making our team feel connected to the brand and invested in the brand, but also that they have a space to be able to chat with other teammates and collaborate through separate pods or breakout rooms. And a combination of strategies that we've put into place have been quite interesting. And I'd love to get your thoughts on a few. One of which is we've got a Slack channel. So we use Slack to communicate. And we have a channel called Water Cooler Chat. It is exclusively non-business chat. You're not allowed to talk about business in it. And we want to talk about our weekends or our dogs, or we want to talk about what's on TV. The idea of trying to connect with effectively a stranger who's also a teammate within the company without ever meeting them seems to be a challenge that we're now all going to be faced with. Based on the program and I guess your own feelings, how do you think this is going to be possible, or do you think it'll be possible?
Well, I think it's difficult because it is a challenge to get that sort of water cooler conversation going over any of these platforms. But I think if you've got a separate one, it's I think it's a very good idea, because that's the connection that people are really lacking. I mean, I feel it myself when I finish one project and go on to another. You sort of leave the last team behind, and you've lost all that connection, which you've got in the office. We work in an open plan office. People around. There's a real buzz. You do bounce ideas off people. You overhear people's conversations. I think that's something that's missing at the moment. You don't pick up on what other people are doing and think, oh yes, actually, I did a program on that a year ago. I said, why don't you talk to so-and-so, and it works for yourself as well. Someone will give you ideas. And some of that just comes through the chatting, the water cooler chatting. And I think if you're able to create that for the freelance community, it's got to be beneficial, because it's all about people feeling connected and plugged in somehow, isn't it? And I think that's going to be the biggest challenge as time goes on. I mean, I heard about a young person, 25-year-old, who's just been told that he's got to work from home for the next year because he works in Canary Wharf it's not a bank, but on the 50th floor, and they've been told that they've got to work from home for a year. And I think for some people that can be devastating if they're used to being within an organization and surrounded by people. And somehow these people who are looking at it pretty long term have got to be drawn back into that sort of community feeling, I think.
Yeah, and on the point of the water cooler chat, that really is a fantastic point. Where we often pick up on snippets of conversations, whether it's right before the boss comes in to deliver a meeting, and we've spoken to guys who have pretty intense full-time jobs where everybody's on their phone at those meetings, right up to the point where the boss sits down on the chair, phones go away, you get the information, and as soon as it's done, the phone is back up. But those gaps traditionally would be where one could speak to somebody they've never met, or somebody in a different department who might be able to solve a lot of those problems. I guess it's finding those little snippets in the ether and in between the gaps of meetings and projects that we are at risk of losing. I mean, both with technology in the office to a degree, but also, as you said, because we're having to work from home.
Yes, I think that's very true. And as you say, even if you are physically there, people do tend to be on their phones or trying to follow up on emails in every spare moment just because they can, because everything is on your phone. But yes, it's I think what this has probably shown us, it's certainly shown me, is how much I value my colleagues, and I value that. Well, I really miss the daily contact. I really do. I mean, even though we have a daily meeting, that doesn't do the water cooler bit. It's still quite a formal setting, and I think creating the informal setting that you're talking about is a bigger challenge, but I think that's what people are missing at the moment.
Yeah, I'd agree. Let's talk finally about the legacy and what you feel that this experience in the last couple of months and perhaps the next few weeks and months will leave us in terms of our work-life balance. What are you seeing? What are you predicting?
Well, it's not really my job to make the predictions. I'm usually asking other people for the predictions, but I do think it's changing. And I would imagine that we're going to look at a more of a hybrid system, more of a hybrid working week. I think people are going to spend more time, a lot more time working from home. They'll go into the office as well. But I think it's going to be a combination. And for many people, it's been very welcome. If you have a very long commute, you haven't got that. People are seeing more of their families and their children. It's not all, it's hard work if you're trying to homeschool at the same time, but there are benefits, and families are seeing more of each other. But I think it will make people reassess what they want out of their working life and their work-life balance. But I would predict a combination, to be honest. And how that balance looks in the long run, I don't know. We'll probably start off with more working from home, going into the office maybe one day a week. I think that would certainly be the situation for me. And then I imagine the working from home will shrink a certain extent and there'll be more time in the office. But I think once you've got people set up to work at home, it's just likely to continue, isn't it? I mean, had to be done very quickly, but people have had to adapt, and we found ways of doing it. So I think to a certain extent it will continue.
Great. Yeah, a balance certainly I think feels like it's on the way. Caroline, thank you so much for your time. Really insightful and really enjoyable.
Okay, thank you.
And we'll be sure to shout out about this fantastic podcast. Great to see you, and thanks again.
Thank you very much, Matt. Okay, bye-bye.